Hello, friends, and welcome back to the From Truth to Freedom podcast. I'm Tony Holden. Have you ever held something in your hand that looked completely genuine, only to discover later that it wasn't? It could have been anything. Maybe it was a diamond ring. Perhaps it was a piece of artwork, a collector's item, or perhaps even $100 bill. At first glance, everything appeared authentic. The craftsmanship, the details, the finish, nothing seemed out of place. Only someone who truly knew the original could recognize the imitation. That's what makes counterfeits so dangerous. Today we're going to talk about counterfeit freedom. Counterfeits don't deceive us because they're completely different. They deceive us because they're almost the same. The better the counterfeit, the greater the deception. Now let me ask you a question. What if history has its own counterfeits? No civilization has ever willingly chosen slavery over liberty. No nation has ever gathered together and declared, well, we've decided we'd rather have less freedom. History simply doesn't work that way. Instead, people are offered something that sounds better: greater security, greater prosperity, greater equality, stability, and greater comfort. Those are all good things. Every one of us desires them. The danger comes when someone asks us to exchange freedom in order to obtain them. That is one of history's oldest bargains. And history repeats the same warnings. Every generation is eventually offered the same exchange. Surrender a little bit of freedom today in exchange for a little more security tomorrow. Is any of this sounding familiar? That bargain has never ended well. Many years ago, when I was a young entrepreneur in the financial services business, a friend of mine gave me some advice. He said, Tony, a nice Rolex watch would really complement your professional image. It communicates success, confidence, and professionalism. Well, quite frankly, that appealed to my ego. It didn't take much convincing. Right then and there, I decided I was going to own a Rolex watch. So I visited the dealer he recommended, and I purchased what I believed was a beautifully authentic Rolex Oyster Perpetual Day Date with a gold and stainless steel Jubilee bracelet and a blue face. It was just gorgeous. And at that time, it felt like a significant investment. I remember walking out of that store feeling pretty proud of myself. For quite a while, I wore that watch with genuine pride. Eventually, I decided to sell it and purchase an even fancier model, if you can believe it. So I took it to another jeweler, and he carefully examined it, and he looked at it, turned it over in his hands, put it under the little microscope thing that they have, studied the serial number. Then he looked at me and quietly said, I'm sorry, but this isn't an authentic Rolex. What? I honestly couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told him I had purchased it from a well-known, reputable, quote-unquote, dealer. I asked him to check it again. He did, same answer. Well, the watch itself was exceptionally well made. It looked genuine. It felt genuine. It kept excellent time. But the serial number revealed the truth. It was an extraordinarily good counterfeit. I remember that sinking feeling I had in my gut. At once, I felt embarrassed, disappointed, and really I felt violated, and truthfully, a little foolish. Not because I had intentionally bought a fake, but because I had confidently believed it was genuine. But I had been fooled. I had proudly worn something that wasn't what I believed it to be. So I returned it to the original dealer. I explained what another jeweler had discovered. I told him the serial number wasn't authentic. He didn't argue. He didn't even debate. He didn't even seem surprised. Without saying much at all, he simply refunded every dollar that I had paid. I walked away grateful that I had recovered my money, but I also walked away with something far more valuable than a watch. I learned that the most convincing counterfeits aren't poor imitations, they're remarkably good ones. They're close enough to the genuine article that most people never recognize the difference. That lesson has stayed with me for years. And as I've studied history, I've come to realize that civilizations can be deceived in much the same way. Counterfeit freedom rarely looks like tyranny. If it did, almost no one would accept it. Instead, it promises security. It promises prosperity. It promises certainty. It promises fairness. Have you ever noticed that history's greatest mistakes almost never begin with bad intentions? No leader ever stood before a nation and announced, "Well, follow me, and I'll slowly take away your freedom." No government has ever campaigned on the promise, "Elect us, and we'll gradually make you dependent upon us." That's not how deception works. Every significant loss of liberty has almost always begun with a promise. Pay attention, please. A promise to solve a problem, a promise to make life easier, a promise to remove uncertainty, a promise to provide greater security. One of the reasons I enjoy studying history is because history doesn't care about our opinions. It doesn't take sides. It doesn't campaign. It doesn't vote. It doesn't make promises to you. History simply records what happened. If we're willing to listen, it quietly asks, do you recognize this pattern? The names change, the languages change, the flags change, but people are remarkably consistent. We all want many of the same things: a safe place to live, meaningful work, the opportunity to raise our children well, and wherever we want to live, a better future than the one we inherited. Those desires are not weaknesses. They're part of being human. They're part of the American quest. The question has never been whether these goals are good. The question is, what are we willing to exchange in order to obtain them? And why would we be willing to accept what we know is counterfeit when we could have the real thing? Doesn't make sense to me. That question has echoed through every century, and history repeats these same warnings. Rome's quiet exchange. Let's begin nearly 2,000 years ago. When most people think about the fall of Rome, they imagine invading armies, barbarians at the gates, military defeat. Well, there was military defeat, for sure, but historians remind us that Rome's decline began long before the empire finally collapsed. For generations, Roman citizens understood that liberty demanded responsibility. Citizens served, families sacrificed, communities participated. People understood that a republic could only survive if its citizens governed themselves before expecting to govern a nation. Over time, something slowly changed. Comfort became more attractive than citizenship. The Roman poet Juvenal described what many citizens had come to desire. He called it bread and circuses, food provided by the state, entertainment to occupy the mind. Now, please hear me carefully. Food isn't wrong. Entertainment isn't wrong. The issue wasn't bread. The issue wasn't the circus. The issue was that a growing number of citizens gradually exchanged individual responsibility for governmental dependence and moral values and discipline for a decadent and irresponsible lifestyle. As more responsibility moved away from the people, more authority naturally accumulated elsewhere. And where do you think that might have been? No one announced, "Today we're ending the republic." There was no dramatic speech, no single law was passed, no single election, no single moment. There were thousands of small ones. Looking back today, we can clearly see the pattern. Living through it, many could not at that time. But history repeats the same warnings. Let's talk about a wall that told the truth. Fast forward to the 20th century. One image came to symbolize the Cold War more than perhaps any other. You know what it is: the Berlin Wall. Concrete, barbed wire, guard towers, families separated, children growing up without grandparents, brothers unable to visit sisters, neighbors becoming strangers overnight. Think about that for just a moment. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning and discovering that someone you love lived only a few miles away, yet you were forbidden to see them. How would you feel about that? That was reality for millions of people. But perhaps the most revealing question is this: why was the wall built? Many people assumed it was built to keep enemies out. In reality, one of its principal purposes was to keep East Germans from leaving. That fact alone should cause us to stop and think. If a political system truly offers greater freedom, greater opportunity, greater hope, why must people be prevented from leaving? And why would they even want to leave? History records tunnel escapes, hidden compartments in automobiles, homemade hot air balloons, people swimming rivers, climbing fences, risking everything simply for the opportunity to live where they could make more of their own choices. Some succeeded. Many did not. Freedom mattered that much. The 20th century witnessed, and we continue to witness, repeated attempts to build societies where government would provide nearly every essential need: economic equality, guaranteed employment, security, stability, the elimination of poverty. Again, does any of this sound familiar? Many of those goals reflect sincere compassion. Who wouldn't want to reduce suffering? Who wouldn't want families to flourish? Who wouldn't want opportunity for everyone? Those are worthy aspirations. But history teaches that good intentions alone are not enough. Every promise carries a price. Sometimes the price isn't discovered until years later. Again and again, governments that accumulated extraordinary authority also found themselves restricting speech, limiting religious liberties, controlling information in the media and otherwise, and reducing the freedom of individuals to make decisions for themselves. Have you seen this anywhere around the world? Not always immediately, usually gradually. History repeats these same warnings, but we must pay attention. Power rarely remains satisfied with the power it already possesses. That isn't simply a political observation, it's an observation about human nature, which brings us to something the Bible recognized thousands of years before political scientists ever wrote about it. The prophet Jeremiah wrote, quote, "The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it?" Close quote. That's Jeremiah 17, verse 9. Notice something remarkable. Jeremiah wasn't talking about kings or presidents or dictators. He was talking about the human heart. Mine, yours, every leader, every citizen, every one of us. That verse reminds us why wise societies establish accountability. Not because they expect perfect leaders, but because they understand imperfect people. And that may be one of the founders' greatest contributions. They didn't build a government that depended upon perfect men. They built a system intended to limit imperfect ones. That doesn't guarantee freedom, but history suggests it gives freedom a far better opportunity to survive. So history leaves us with an important question. If counterfeit freedom has deceived civilizations before, could it possibly deceive us now? Next time, we'll discover how to know if we're being offered a counterfeit freedom or the real thing, and what to do about it. Because history repeats these same warnings, but it also reveals the principles that preserve liberty. Thank you for joining me today on the From Truth to Freedom podcast. If today's conversation encouraged you, gave you any greater knowledge, or made you a little more curious, I hope you'll like it and share with someone who values freedom. I'm Tony Holden. Until next time, remember, discover truth, live in freedom, and thrive in life.